And what up? This video popped up into my YouTube feed. Is basically the creator of the Garfield comic strip, Jim Davis, talking about his process to making comics. For a long time I wanted to do these reaction videos where I look at different people's processes and them talking about it and walking us through it and just seeing what it is I can take, and maybe later on even trying that system out. But let's go ahead and do one of those today with this Jim Davis video.
I'm Jim Davis, and this is Paws Incorporated, where the Garfield comic strip is drawn every day. And we're going to show you how it's drawn. I write the comic strip 1 week out of the month. And what I've learned is that if I can really focus a week on just the writing of the strip, I can create a month's worth of gags. Garfield writes his own material. I simply edit. It's really...
That's a very interesting point, because I do believe that to be true, that once you really know the character, it's more about putting these different characters in different situations and really letting those characters just do what they would normally do. And that comes with time of really knowing that character. And so I think for a comic book strip, definitely that's much more helpful and useful. But if you are doing the different kind of comic book storylines or anthologies, you know, that becomes a little more difficult because every story and every character is going to be different. But for the strip, that makes sense. And I didn't realize that he wrote all the month worth of strips in a week. That's pretty interesting.
Getting into this almost meditative state. He has to make me laugh first before I write anything else down. Sometimes the gags don't come as easily as other times, so I do use some tricks to get into a funnier mood. It helps to be rested, by the way. I drink coffee to get the heart pounding. Also, I like to read comic books. When it's all complete in my head, then I start the rough drawing. I hear the voice, I see the characters, and I very quickly try to sketch it out before the image goes away. The trick is actually freeze framing Garfield, because he's animated in my head, so I have to stop him in just the appropriate position, because I only have 3 frames to work with him. I set the gag up, I twist it, and then I resolve the situation. When I'm done with...
I love that about the comic book strips. I think you guys have heard me say this before, that it is such the comedic, like there's such a comedic value to these comic book strips of, like, you know, the problem, the setup, the punchline. It's you cannot miss a beat when you do a comic book strip, especially if you want it to work and work well. Like, you really need to be dialed in on what the joke is and what the punchline is going to be. And like, he's right, like, you have a very limited amount of space, so the idea becomes, like, how do you utilize these 3 panels to maximize the point, the joke, the thought? Like, it is one of the things that makes me appreciate and just admire comic book strips.
Thumbnail sketches, then I take them to Eric for penciling. Hi, I'm Eric Reeves, and I do the blue line and lettering for the Garfield comic strip. Okay, what I'm doing now is just interpreting Jim's rough sketch and taking it into a more final look. You can draw circles, you can draw Garfield. We use the cotton gloves just to keep our body oils and grease off the surface while we're drawing. When you make a mistake, it's really no big deal. You just get your eraser out, erase. And once the blue line pencils are done, then I put the lettering on. The Garfield strip is a little different in that we do all our lettering by hand. So when I sit down and do the lettering, you have that hand feel.
I don't know if necessarily that's strange for comic strip artists. I feel like most comic book strip artists have their own unique hand lettering. I feel like I can tell a strip just from the lettering sometimes, especially the ones that I'm really into. But I don't think that's uncommon. I think that's strange. What I do think that it's uncommon is I didn't realize that Jim Davis did this rough draft on pencils and then handed it to someone else to then do the final art. Or not the final art, because I do believe that the inking is the final art. And there's actually a really good Charles Schutz video that we're going to probably look at, where he talks about how the inking phase of it all is the actual drawing phase. And I tend to agree with that. But it's weird. I didn't realize that Jim Davis didn't do the pencils that would be the final panels. But let's see, because maybe he is the one that inks it in the end.
You don't get from a computer. You know, every E is not exactly the same. It gives it, you know, just a little bit more character to the strip. Once the lettering is done, then my job is over, and I walk it over to Lars, and he starts on the inking.
Hi, my name is Larry Fence. Some people call me Lars, and I ink the Garfield comic strip. And I usually start inking on either the eyes or Garfield's nose, just because it's the center of his face, and the ovals seem to be...
So I'm sorry, but it feels to me almost like Jim Davis is the writer, and then he had other artists to bring it to life, which is cool, but it does sadden me because you would assume that these artists would have had their names or their signature on the work. I've never seen any of their signatures on the Garfield strip work. I've always seen Jim Davis, but I can understand because if they are doing their rendition of the panels the way Jim Davis did them, but nonetheless, in the end, the panels that you're seeing were drawn and inked by somebody else. So that's crazy. I didn't realize.
The most difficult to do, so I get those out of the way right off the bat. The black line just allows you to see the line work more readily. It prints easier. The blue line would actually drop out, so that's basically a map or a guideline to ink by. This headset allows me to magnify the strip so I can see what I'm inking. I have to be able to control the brush precisely, and it's difficult if you can't see the brush. Well, not everybody has to wear these, just the old guys. The ink dries pretty fast, but I've caught myself going faster than the ink dries. That's it, we're ready for color.
Hi, I'm Tom Howard. I'm the colorist for the Garfield cartoon strip.
And I'm not a fan of digital coloring, and I could always tell that Garfield was digital coloring, always, and it doesn't surprise me. But even that, I was wondering if Jim Davis maybe did the coloring after the fact. But no, it sounds like Jim Davis works that 1 week where he comes up with the story, the gags, really understands the Garfield character, and obviously is the steward of that character. I'm not taking anything away from Jim Davis. I just didn't realize, and I don't think that his team has gotten enough kudos, because definitely there's some really smart cartooning in the Garfield comic strips, but obviously, like they're saying, like a lot of it does come first and foremost from Jim Davis and their interpretation of the art that he gives them. So like someone like Alan Moore turns in scripts with sketches, but no one would say that those sketches there equate that he was the artist of the comic. He's the writer of the comic for sure, but that doesn't mean that he's the full-blown artist of it. So this is kind of weird. I didn't realize this shit.
Basically have it scanned in the computer, and then it'll become a digital file, and from there it comes into my Photoshop program where I'll start my coloring. The stylus, I can basically get in and color things in a very tight kind of motion. Also, a stylus gives you a little more flexibility for the artist. Rather than using a block of soap or something like that, the stylus gives an artist the same feel as a brush or a pen. We have certain colors that we use for the Garfield characters, the oranges, the browns, the yellows. One Garfield orange, it's a sort of a vibrant orange. It's a 137 is what its number is. There's an open area where the inker hasn't filled in a line or connected a line. The color will come all the way through into the background. So for this particular one, I'm going to kind of fill in a little bit of Garfield here and overlap, and basically I'll fill in as much as I can here to try to find the open spaces and basically fill in like this. Then I'll go back and use white to clean up the edges. Garfield's lip is a Pantone 100, and basically I'll go in here and fill in the open areas here with a brush tool. Looks like we're all done now, and this will go off to Jim for his approval. Here you go, Jim.
This is brilliant. Who wrote this?
You did, Mr. Davis.
Oh, of course. And what you've seen up to now is really easy. Now comes the really tough part, and that is sending the comic strips to the newspapers. This is how we do it.
And I appreciate that in the end he does say, you know, who wrote this, because he understood that in that equation he's the writer. But definitely, I'm sure that once upon a time in the beginning, before he had his own studio, because, you know, he had a full-blown studio and team working with him. But before that moment, I'm sure he was the sole writer and creator of Garfield, and that's why he was still the steward of him. And I'm not knocking anything in the style, because that does feel like a lot of those manga houses that I've heard about. And definitely we should probably peep out some of the manga style of making comics, because I think it is interesting. It's a very different system, and a lot of it does make sense, and a lot of American cartoonists that I like have implemented some of that manga style. But that's it for today, man. I just want to look and react to this Jim Davis video that popped up in my YouTube feed. And so expect more videos like this. Hope you guys enjoyed it. Please like, share, and subscribe, and I'll see you next time. Lates.